All right, in this final part of our chapter, we are going to look at the barriers to critical thinking. Now, what are barriers? Barriers are basically hindrances that prevent us from thinking in a proper manner. So most of the time when we are thinking critically, we are trying to sharpen our resistance to either irrational or narrow-minded arguments. This means that we are preventing ourselves from arguments that are irrational. So it is very important for us to understand what are these irrational or narrow-minded approaches, because this can help us to sharpen our thinking skills and help us to come up with effective strategies to counter these barriers that we may be facing. So in other words, what we need to do is we need to know what exactly are the barriers that occur to critical thinking and how can we overcome them. So looking at this, you can see that we basically have 6 general barriers that prevent us from thinking critically. One of it is resistance, which consists of 8 different types of resistance that can happen. Narrow-mindedness, 5 different versions of narrow-mindedness, rationalization, doublethink, cognitive and social dissonance, as well as stress. So let's look at these one by one. Now, when we look at thinking, there are 3 levels of thinking. Most of the time when it comes to our process of thinking, we divide it into 3 levels, which is experience, interpretation, as well as analysis. So at the experience level, this is basically the foundation of our critical thinking, which means we are looking at the experience that we face firsthand, as well as any kind of empirical facts that we get from other sources. So this means that we're looking at the situations based on how we feel at that moment. So look at this example here. Imagine a person going for an interview. At the interview, they realized that they did not do very well, regardless of what could have happened. They did not do well, and therefore they were turned down. So at your thinking level, at this point, you would say, I was turned down for the job I was interviewed for. This is the experience that you have gone through. At the next stage, where it is your interpretation, you are trying to make sense of this experience that has happened. So at that interview, you were turned down. That's your experience. And then when you look at your interpretation, this is where you try to understand why it didn't happen. Now bear in mind, your interpretation is based on your thinking skills, what you understand from that situation. So this basically means that you are saying, I did not get this job because I didn't have the right connections. So let's just say that's your interpretation, meaning I did not get this job because I didn't know the right people at the job. So from that interpretation, you have to go into a deeper analysis, which is your third stage. So at the third stage, which is the highest level of thinking, you are basically increasing your level of thinking and analyzing your situation for a better understanding. So when you say that, okay, I did not get the job because I didn't know the right people, at the analysis, you start thinking further. Wait, is that really what happened? Or is it something else? Was it the fact that I didn't know the right people? Or could it be that I did not have the right interviewing skills, which made me too nervous during the interview? Or could it be that the qualifications that I had simply weren't enough for the job that they were looking for? So this is where you're starting to think further, asking yourself whether or not your first interpretation was really what it was, or is there something else to it. So by being able to analyze and think thoroughly, you are able to critically analyze and assess the situation for a better understanding. However, in reality, we don't reach the level of analysis. Most of the time, when we experience something, our interpretation is something that is at a surface level. Say for instance, I woke up late, that's my experience. I missed my first lecture. Okay, based on my experience. My interpretation is, oh, I missed my lecture because the bus driver was driving too fast. Now, instead of analyzing it further, was it really the bus driver's fault, or was it the fact that I did not set my alarm and I was being irresponsible? In reality, that should be my trail of thought. However, if I were to face resistance, or I prevent myself from thinking further, I would not reach the level of what is the real reason behind me being late. I would continue to blame the person, blame the driver in this case, instead of actually analyzing it further. So when I continue to blame the driver, that is where I'm facing a barrier to critical thinking, which is resistance. Now let's look at different types of resistance that may occur which prevent us from reaching our analysis level. So like I said before, resistance is all about how most people don't like to be seen as wrong. We don't like to be told that what we are doing is something that we shouldn't have done. So what happens is that we resist from thinking further. So in its proper definition, we see it as the use of immature defense mechanisms, which are rigid, impulsive, based on what we think, maladaptive, and non-analytical. In other words, resistance is not good. So resistance becomes an issue when we become very used to behaving in this manner, because we don't want to think further. I didn't get the job. Based on the first example, I didn't get the job, I don't want to talk about it. The bus driver is awful, that's why he never waits for me. I don't want to talk about it. So by doing this, you're resisting yourself, you're preventing your development of your thinking, and at the same time, it causes you to react in a different way, thus creating anxiety. So one of the resistance that is very common is the idea of avoidance. Just like what I said just now, I didn't get a job, I don't want to talk about it. So by avoiding talking about the situation or avoiding dealing with the situation, you are escaping the problem. When you escape the problem, it doesn't mean that the problem disappears. It just means that you're not handling it. So, in other words, you're resisting thinking further, and indirectly, you're resisting trying to analyze the situation to come up with a proper solution. So most of the time we tend to do this, even in your everyday situations. When you're dealing with a friend, if you were to have a fallout with a friend, if you were to have a misunderstanding with your friend, instead of approaching that friend, confronting that friend and asking the friend what his or her problem is, you choose to just avoid the person altogether. So this means that you are not allowing your problem to be fixed, mainly because you're choosing to resist it. Another type of resistance that can also occur is anger. Now this is something that's very common. Most of the time what happens is when you realize that you have done something wrong, instead of admitting your mistake, instead of trying to analyze what to do to improve the situation, you get angry with another person. How many times have we come across our family members, for instance, getting angry over a particular issue, and instead of dealing with that issue, they choose to take it out on the person closest to them. I'm sure every single one of us have gone through this situation. You might also come across possibly a college lecturer coming up to you and taking it out on the class due to some anger he or she may have had with another colleague. So anger involves responding to challenges in a more threatening or verbal way. Again, being angry doesn't mean that your problem is going to be fixed. It's just going to create more frustration. Another common resistance is cliches. Now, a cliche is basically a sentence or a phrase that we always say for the sake of saying it, mainly to divert the attention from the real situation. So this again prevents effective critical thought. Why? Because when you use a cliche, you are basically coming up with an excuse for the situation. Let me give you an example. Now, if you have male students and female students in class, and female students are doing well in their subject, and male students don't seem to be performing well. Now, it could be that the male students are struggling to understand the situation, or the male students are having their own personal problems that prevent them from understanding the lesson. However, instead of dealing with the problem, if the professor or lecturer were to say, well, boys are boys, this is how they are, that is a cliche. So that basically means instead of handling the right situation, instead of dealing with how to overcome their problems with the studies, you are giving an excuse based on their gender. Again, it does not fix the problem, it just extenuates or extends the problem further. Another type of resistance is denial. So this is also another thing. Imagine fighting with your friend, and instead of trying to solve the problem, you say, no, wait, what problem? There's no problem. I did not fight with my friend. I'm not angry with him. Denying it. Now, this is something that we often find in relationships. When a couple a particular partner is angry with the other person, instead of dealing with the problem, they say, I'm fine, nothing is wrong. So by denying, you are merely ignoring or refuting the challenging points. Another situation is that when somebody tells you to do something and you deny that person, you tell that person, no, this is not it. You're denying that person the right to express their ideas. That also occurs as a type of resistance. Ignorance is also a very common thing. Now, ignorance basically means it's very similar to avoidance, but avoidance is you completely avoid the situation. Ignorance is when you choose to ignore it. For instance, let me give you an example. If you were to visit a different country. Now, visiting a different country, imagine going to a country where the language is completely different from yours, the culture is completely different from yours, the traditions, the rituals, or whatever they do is entirely different from what you are used to. So imagine going to that country and doing something in a way which is something that you are used to, but for them is wrong. So instead of admitting your mistake, or instead of learning more about what to do to prevent this, you say, well, I didn't know this. It's not my fault that their culture is like this. So by saying that, you are being ignorant. So indirectly, this prevents you from thinking critically and coming up with a proper way of dealing with that different culture. Instead of blaming it on them by saying that, well, you should, how am I supposed to know your culture is like that? It's not my fault. So by avoiding to learn about the situation, again, you are resisting thinking clearly. The sixth type of resistance is conformity. Now, conformity basically means you conform, meaning you go with the flow. So this involves going along with group or peer viewpoints, even when you disagree with them. So a simple situation will be something like, imagine you and your friends decide to go out for dinner to a particular restaurant. Now, everyone has got differing opinions of where to go and eat. And if one of your friends were to suggest, let's go to a Thai restaurant, and you are a person who does not enjoy Thai food, instead of telling your friends, no, I don't enjoy Thai food, let's try something different, you choose to just go with them. But while you're having dinner, the whole time you have got a sulky face, you're angry, you're annoyed with the fact that your friends chose to eat Thai food. But you can't really blame them, because in this situation, you have chosen to conform with them. So by conforming, you are indirectly restricting your communication with your friends and indirectly making yourself a person who is not able to handle the situation well. The seventh type of resistance is struggling. Now, struggling basically means that you're so caught up with the minute details of an issue that nothing gets accomplished. Now, a perfect example of this is when you have an assignment to do. Let's just say you have a PowerPoint presentation to work on. You know that the presentation is something that is very difficult. It involves doing a lot of research, preparing a lot of material. However, because you are so caught up with focusing on the design of the PowerPoint, the font size, the color of your background, you focus on all these minute details that you overlook the bigger issue. As a result, you are struggling to finish your assignment on time, mainly because you are focusing on all the small matters that were not really important. So again, by doing that, by not having a proper plan, by struggling with all of these things, you prevent yourself from thinking in a proper way to fix your problem, to finish your assignment on time. The last type of resistance is distractions. Now, again, this is something that's very common, not just among students, among working people, among anyone for that matter. Distractions are basically hindrances that prevent you from thinking clearly. One type of distraction would be, let's just say you have 3 assignments to complete by tomorrow. So instead of coming up with a proper timetable, allocating the right amount of time to do each assignment, you decide, oh, you know what, I'll take a short break. Let me go on YouTube for 10 minutes and then I'll come back and work on my assignment. As a result of going on YouTube, you get distracted, you end up watching a couple of videos, and before you know it, you've already spent 3 hours watching videos and not working on your assignment. So you distracted yourself from doing what you were supposed to do. So again, this shows that you're not critically analyzing your problems, you're not thinking clearly. As a result, again, your assignments are not completed. So these are just some of the types of resistance that we have, or sometimes we don't realize that we are actually doing while trying to complete our work or while trying to understand things better. Aside from resistance, another type of barrier that prevents us from thinking clearly is narrow-mindedness. Now, narrow-mindedness basically means that you are very rigid in the way you think. You're narrow-minded because you believe what you think is the only way of thinking, and therefore you do not want to look at different perspectives. So this is another aspect of preventing yourself from thinking clearly. Narrow-mindedness comes in 5 different ways. The first one is absolutism. Now, absolutism is the perspective where you look at things as black or white, as right or wrong. If things are not done in this manner, it must be done in this manner. If it's not done in this manner, it's wrong. So being absolute also means that you are only allowing yourself to see things as either this way or that way. There's no in-between way. So by doing this, you're preventing yourself from looking at things from a different perspective. This means that you're only looking at things from one direction, which also means that you're not allowing your thoughts to evolve properly. Another type of narrow-mindedness is the fear of challenge. So the fear of challenge basically means that you're reluctant. You don't want to stand up to what other people think because you're worried that your opinion might be something so different from theirs and they might challenge you. So the fear of being challenged makes you do things in one specific way again, simply because you are afraid of trying something different, because you will have to explain it to people who don't understand. So being afraid of being challenged is not just something that affects you in terms of your self-esteem, but also affects you in terms of thinking critically. The third type of narrow-mindedness is egocentrism. Now, the word ego basically means self. And egocentrism is the type of perspective where you see yourself as the center of everything else. In other words, the entire world revolves around me. What I say is important. What everyone else says does not matter. So by choosing to only focus on yourself, it is a selfish way of looking at things, and therefore you are preventing yourself from getting the perspectives from different points of views, and as a result, you're not only centering everything around yourself, you're also pushing aside everyone else's opinion, which again translates into being narrow-minded. The fourth type of narrow-mindedness is ethnocentrism. Now, this is something that happens when you have an uncritical or unjustified belief that your race, your culture, your religion, your way of thinking, your beliefs are better than the others. All right, now look at countries that have been colonized, for instance. When we look at, say, Malaysia. Malaysia was colonized by 4 different types of people. We had the Portuguese, the Dutch, the British, as well as the Japanese. Every single time a country is colonized by another country, most of the time what happens is that the colonizers believe that the people there need to be educated. Whatever culture they have, whatever language they have is not right. It's uncivilized. Therefore, we need to teach them. So by doing that, by having that sort of opinion, you are basically being ethnocentric, meaning you believe that my culture or my language or my religion is the right thing, and therefore I must teach the other people because whatever else they think is wrong. So again, this reflects narrow-mindedness. And the last form of narrow-mindedness is anthropocentrism. Now, anthropocentrism comes from the word anthro. Anthro means humans. Therefore, the idea of a person who is anthropocentric is that they believe humans are the central or most significant entity in the universe. So this basically means that everything a human does matters more than what happens in nature or the environment. So this is being narrow-minded in this situation means that you are more concerned with human lives rather than the lives of other living beings. For example, let's just say we have a developer who wants to build homes. He believes that building homes in a particular area will help humans because humans need homes to live in. However, in order to build those homes, he needs to clear out the forest. And he says that this is a sacrifice that we have to make. It doesn't matter if we chop down the trees, it doesn't matter if the animals lose their habitat, because humans need homes and humans are more important than the animals and plants. So this idea, this ideology shows that they are being narrow-minded. Because in a different situation, instead of choosing to clear out the forest, you can choose to either find a different location or you can choose to relocate the animals. But no, in this case, they are saying this sacrifice needs to be made because humans are more important. So these are just some of the examples of narrow-mindedness. Now, another type of barrier that can happen in critical thinking is also rationalization and doublethink. Now, rationalization basically means that you are trying to justify, you're talking to yourself and convincing yourself that what you're doing is right. So, for instance, when we are faced with a difficult choice or a decision, we often convince ourselves to justify our decision. Like, for instance, let's just say someone has found money on the road, and instead of giving it to the police or trying to find the owner of the wallet that they have found, they say, well, if I were to have lost my money, I don't think anyone would help me. Therefore, it's okay if I keep this money. So that's an example of rationalization. So indirectly, you're trying to justify that the decision you have made is absolutely fine because in a different situation, people will behave the same way. So this is what we mean by rationalization. And most of the time when you try to rationalize, although it might seem like it's correct, it doesn't necessarily mean that. Why? Because at the end of the day, the decision that you have made is rationalized using your personal opinion or using your bias and not facts. Right? And because rationalization also involves ignoring competing claims, most of the time people who rationalize, who try to convince themselves of what they're doing is right, end up being involved or being caught up in double thinking. Now, double think basically means you're holding two different contradictory views at the same time, meaning you have double standards because you believe both of these can be true. And double think is something that has an impact in our real life because this affects us on a daily basis. Now, take for instance, most of the time in everyday life, we talk about equal rights for both genders. Men and women should have equal rights. Women should be given the same opportunities as men. We always talk about things like this, where women should be given proper rights, women should not be treated as less significant than men. So this is one opinion we have, which is right. But at the same time, you see in most places, for instance, in shopping malls in Malaysia, there are specific parking lots allocated for women. Why do women get special parking lots then? If you want women to be treated equally as men, why can't there be parking lots allocated for men as well? So this is an example of doublethink, where you have one opinion, treat women the same as men. But at the same time, yes, we treat women equally, but at the same time, let's give them parking lots specially for them because we need to protect them more than the men. So this is an example of having two different views that are exactly opposite of one another, but we believe both of them to be true. Therefore, this is double thinking. So by double thinking, we are indirectly limiting our way of thinking as well. Another type of barrier that can also occur in critical thinking is cognitive and social dissonance. Now, we talked about cognitive, the word cognitive in our previous lesson, whereby cognitive is related to learning. Social is related to your social life. Dissonance on its own is defined as a difference that occurs. Therefore, this refers to situations where new ideas or social behavior directly conflict with our views. So in other words, what we are used to is something that is the total opposite of what we are seeing happening. Now, this is something that often happens when we go to a different place, when we work in a new environment, when we visit a different country, for instance. So most of the time, what people end up saying is that they are facing culture shock. So culture shock basically means cognitive and social dissonance as well. Having culture shock means that you are so shocked by what has happened that it prevents you from thinking further. All right? So what happens is that because we have been faced in this sort of a situation, we have been faced in a situation that we are not used to, we end up changing the way we think simply because we believe that, oh no, because we are in this situation, we must think this way. Now, this doesn't necessarily mean it's a bad thing all the time. In certain situations, it makes sense to think that way. But it becomes a problem for critical thinking when we completely choose to change the way we believe simply because we think this is how it should be. So that appears as, that means that you're completely disregarding what you have learned before. You're ignoring your cognitive development simply because you feel you want to fit into society at that time. So evidence suggests that most of the time, when people change the way they behave, the way they think also changes. So this is something that you have to be very careful with, because this can prevent you from thinking in a proper way as well. Now, one of the last barriers that occur in critical thinking is stress. So stress can also come as a barrier because in most days, what happens is that when we experience excessive stress, we indirectly change or limit our thinking ability. So the more stress we feel, the slower we start to think. Or at some points we just say, I don't want to think about this anymore. Let me just deal with it later because I'm stressed right now. So by doing that, we are indirectly preventing ourselves from handling the situation in a proper way, which we could do when we are not feeling stressed. So in order for us to overcome this, not just stress, but in order for us to overcome any kind of barrier, we need to mentally rehearse our responses. How will we handle each situation if we are put in this situation? So indirectly, by knowing what the barriers are, we are able to learn how to counteract them. So in conclusion, chapter 1 is all about thinking effectively and critically, which means that we're not just developing one skill, but rather combining a collection of our skills from attentiveness, open-mindedness, strong communication, analytical research, as well as problem-solving skills. At the same time, being a good critical thinker, we need to be aware of the different types of barriers that we face, such as the habitual use of resistance, the different types of narrow-mindedness, as well as other types of hindrance that we come across. Thank you.